She stood by the kitchen counter, arms crossed, her voice sharp enough to slice through the quiet. "He's too old for this house," she said. My son did not say a word. He just stared at the floor, as if guilt could be hidden in silence. The deed papers were still on the table, the same ones I had signed 20 years ago when this house was meant to protect our family. That moment something in me shifted. Not anger, not sadness, just clarity. By sunset, those papers had a new name on them, not theirs. Before I tell you how it all began, ask yourself, what would you do if the home you built became the weapon used against you? Before we continue, subscribe for more father stories where betrayal meets justice. That morning, the scent of lemon cleaner still hung in the air, just as my late wife used to like it. But when I walked into the living room, the walls looked bare. The family portraits that once filled them, the wedding photo, my son's kindergarten smile, my wife's soft eyes, were gone. In their place hung a giant canvas of abstract paint, colors that meant nothing to me. I stood there for a long time. Not angry, not yet, just empty. When I asked where the photos were, my daughter-in-law smiled, pretending not to notice my unease. "Oh, they were cluttering the space," she said lightly. "I stored them in the garage. We're going for a fresher look now." Fresher. That was her word for erasing history. My son glanced at me from the sofa, guilt flickering across his face. He did not defend me. He did not even speak. Just reached for the remote and turned the TV louder. I told myself it was harmless, just decoration. But that night, when her friends arrived, I saw what it really meant. They laughed and sipped wine while she led them through the house like a realtor giving a tour. "This kitchen has such potential," one of them said. My daughter-in-law smiled proudly. "Oh yes, we're thinking of knocking down that wall next year. Make it open concept." I nearly dropped my glass. "We're thinking." When one of them asked, "So this is your place now?" she just smiled and said, "Almost." The words sliced through the noise. My hands tightened around the rim of my glass until it creaked. Nobody noticed. After they left, I sat at the kitchen table alone. The quiet had weight. The clock ticked behind me, slow and merciless. My son came in later, half apologetic, half exhausted. "She didn't mean it that way, Dad," he said softly. I looked up. "Then how did she mean it?" He hesitated. "She just wants to make this house feel like home for everyone." I nodded. "Home for everyone," I repeated. "Interesting." He smiled weakly, not realizing the irony. The next morning, I found a cardboard box in the garage labeled "Old Stuff," Dad's. Inside were my wife's knitting needles, a few photo frames, and the ceramic bird she used to keep by the window. It was chipped. I ran my thumb along the edge, remembering how she used to say, "A house holds more than walls. It holds memories." That night, my daughter-in-law announced that she'd invited the neighborhood association over for coffee next week. "It'll be good to show them how we've updated things," she said. "They'll be impressed." She did not even notice me sitting there at the table. I watched her as she rearranged the flowers, humming a tune that did not belong in that house. Every move she made pushed my wife's presence a little further out the door. My son joined in, suggesting new curtains, maybe repainting the study. I felt the heat rise in my chest. "That study," I said quietly, "was built with your mother's savings. Every inch of it still smells like her perfume." He chuckled awkwardly. "Dad, come on. We're just making it more comfortable." "For whom?" I asked. He looked down. The question hung between us unanswered. Later that evening, I sat by the fireplace with the house deed in my lap. The ink had faded, but the signatures were still clear, mine, my wife's, the notary's. I remembered the day we signed it. She was wearing a yellow dress, smiling so wide I thought the whole world had opened up for us. Now that same paper felt heavier than stone. I folded it gently and placed it back in the drawer. Through the wall I could hear laughter. My son and his wife watching television, planning their tomorrow as if I were already gone. I told myself I was overreacting, that families go through seasons of misunderstanding. But as the hours passed, the sound of their laughter turned sharp, echoing off walls that no longer felt mine. I turned off the lamp and whispered to the darkness, "I built this house with love. But love should never be this lonely." And that was the night I realized I was becoming a guest in my own home. 3 mornings later, I found my son standing on the porch with a real estate magazine in his hand. The early sun caught the guilt in his eyes before he could hide it. "Morning, Dad," he said. His tone was light, but too light, like someone trying to sound casual before saying something they should not. I poured myself coffee and waited. The silence stretched. He finally sighed. "You know, this place is a lot to handle for you. Maybe it is time to think about something smaller." I looked at him over the rim of my cup. "Smaller?" he nodded. "A quiet place near the lake. It would be good for you." "Less work." I smiled, but it was not a warm one. "Or maybe good for you," I said softly. He flinched just a flicker, then shrugged it off. "You know that's not what I mean." But it was exactly what he meant. Inside, the house smelled of paint. The daughter-in-law had started repainting the dining room without asking. My wife had chosen that wallpaper 30 years ago, pale cream with blue flowers. And now it was gone under a coat of beige. When I asked her about it, she smiled and said, "Oh, I thought something lighter would make the space feel more open." Open, another one of her words that really meant emptier. I walked to my wife's old chair and touched the armrest. There was still a faint dent where she used to rest her hand while reading. The sound of the brush strokes behind me felt almost cruel, like covering her memory with fresh paint. That evening, my son came home from work, looking tired but determined. He sat across from me at the kitchen table. "Dad, we should probably talk about the future," he began. I stared at him. "Whose future?" He sighed. "Yours, ours. Look, you are getting older. We want to make sure you are comfortable. Maybe if we took over the house, we could—" I raised my hand. "Stop right there," I said quietly. "You want to take over the house?" He stammered, "It's just practical. We could update it, refinance." I laughed softly, not out of humor but disbelief. "You mean profit from it?" The air turned heavy. He looked down at his hands. "You always think the worst of people," he muttered. "No," I said. "I just think what experience taught me to think." That night I sat alone in my study, with the house deed spread out before me. I traced the inked lines of our signatures, mine and my late wife's. I remembered how proud she had been the day we signed it. "This house will outlive us," she had said, smiling. "And maybe it will teach our son what it means to build something with your own hands." But she had been wrong. Or maybe I had failed to teach him. When I closed the folder, I noticed something strange. A printed renovation proposal left on the desk, addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Parker. That was my son's name, not mine. The estimate detailed kitchen replacements, new flooring, and an expansion plan. I turned the page, and there it was, my signature, forged in neat cursive. My heart went still. I walked into the hallway, hearing faint laughter from the living room. She was showing him design options on her tablet, talking about our next phase. My voice trembled when I spoke. "Where did you get those papers?" She looked up, startled. "What papers?" "The renovation plans, the ones you forged my name on." She froze. My son shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, it is just a draft. We were going to show you after you submitted it." I asked. For a long moment, no one said anything. Only the sound of the refrigerator hummed between us. Finally, I turned away. "I see," I whispered. "Enjoy your plans." I walked back to the study and closed the door. My hands were shaking, but my mind was cold and clear. The denial was gone. I sat down, staring at the framed photo of my wife on the desk. Her smile looked softer under the lamplight, almost knowing. "I am sorry," I murmured. "I let them forget what this home meant." And that was when I noticed it, another folder tucked under the deed. When I pulled it out, I saw a fresh document titled Transfer Draft. My name was nowhere on it. That was the night I realized what she had meant when she said, "Once the papers are done, we will finally have space." She had not meant space in the house. She meant space without me. Sunday dinners used to be sacred in our home. My wife and I had always kept that tradition. One day each week, when the table felt like the heart of the family. After she passed, I tried to keep it alive. But that evening, as I set the plates out, it felt more like a formality than a gathering. The daughter-in-law arrived first, her heels clicking on the hardwood like a metronome of ownership. She had invited 2 of their friends without asking, calling it a casual get-together. I stood by the window, quiet, listening to her laughter fill the same room where my wife once whispered prayers before meals. When we sat down, she spoke as though she were hosting. "I've been thinking," she began, slicing her chicken neatly. This house really is too much for one person to manage. It is not safe for older people to handle big properties anymore. Her words were coated with politeness, but the poison was clear. One of her friends nodded sympathetically. "You are so thoughtful, Emma. It must be hard watching him do everything himself." I smiled faintly. "I appreciate the concern," I said. "But I still remember which end of the hammer is which." They laughed politely, but her eyes hardened. She leaned forward, her voice softening to that condescending sweetness some people mistake for kindness. "You know, Dad, maybe it is time you let us take over responsibilities. You deserve rest." My son looked away, his fork still, his silence the heaviest voice at the table. I stared at her for a long time before replying. "Rest is earned through peace, not eviction." The table went quiet. Even the clock on the wall seemed to pause. She smiled again, but this time her voice had lost its charm. "That is not what I meant, of course. We just think it would be easier if we handled things." "You can still stay, but—" I interrupted gently. "But under your roof, not mine." My son finally spoke, barely above a whisper. "Dad, please, let's not make this uncomfortable." I turned to him. "Uncomfortable? Son, you are sitting in the house your mother and I built with our hands. If this is uncomfortable for you, perhaps you are sitting in the wrong chair." Her friends excused themselves soon after, pretending it was late. The silence that followed was thick. Later that evening, a neighbor stopped by to return a casserole dish. As I greeted her at the door, my daughter-in-law appeared behind me and said cheerfully, "Oh, thank you. We are still settling into our place." Our place. The neighbor glanced at me with confusion, then at her, then smiled awkwardly. "Well, it's a lovely home." When she left, I turned slowly. "Our place?" She crossed her arms. "What? It will be ours eventually, won't it?" "I'm just getting used to it." I nodded once, my lips pressed thin. "I see." That night I sat alone on the porch. The light from the kitchen window glowed against the glass, soft and gold, like it used to when my wife baked late at night. I could almost hear her hum again, the same tune she sang while folding laundry, the sound of belonging. But that light was not mine anymore. It was theirs. I went inside and walked straight to my study. The drawer where I kept the deed papers was slightly open. I pulled it out and my heart sank. Copies were missing. Neat, careful copies. The son had made them, I was sure of it. For a moment I could not move. The betrayal was not loud. It was quiet, the kind that seeps through the walls you once built with love. I sat there, my hand resting on the folder, remembering my wife's voice on the day we got the house key. "Promise me you'll keep this home safe," she had said. And I had. Until now. I closed the drawer, locked it, and leaned back in the chair. My reflection in the window looked older, smaller. But behind the tired eyes, something steady began to rise, a calm resolve I had not felt in years. They wanted control. They wanted power. But I still had something they did not. Wisdom, patience, and the law on my side. And in that moment I understood. They were preparing to erase me, one signature at a time. The house had never been so quiet. Even the clock on the wall seemed to tick slower, careful not to disturb the silence I had built around myself. After that dinner, I stopped joining them at the table. I ate in the kitchen instead, by the window that overlooked the garden my wife once tended with her bare hands. Most days, I sat there with my coffee growing cold, just listening, not to voices, but to the sounds that revealed more than words ever could. The faint laughter coming from the living room, the low hum of a vacuum in my study where she had no business being, the sound of my own heart hardening one beat at a time. My son barely spoke to me now. When he did, his voice was strained like someone walking on a frozen lake afraid to make a sound. "Dad, you need to rest more," he would say. "I rest just fine," I would answer. But he did not look me in the eye anymore. The daughter-in-law had begun calling the place our home more freely. She even changed the Wi-Fi name to Parker Home 2.0. I noticed it one morning when my phone tried to connect automatically. I stared at the screen for a long time before turning it off. I had no reason to argue. Words had lost their weight in that house. Instead, I watched and remembered. Sometimes at night, I would sit in my study with the small lamp on, the same one my wife bought when our son graduated college. I talked to her photo quietly, not as a ritual but as a release. "I tried to raise him right," I said once. "Taught him about honesty, about keeping your word." Her photograph smiled back, the kind of smile that forgave everything. I started noticing things. Receipts left on the counter for new furniture, business cards from contractors, and emails printed and half hidden under the mail pile. One evening I found a message left open on the family laptop. Confirmed appointment with legal office regarding property documents, Friday, 2 p.m. I read it 3 times, slow and calm. The sender was her. The recipient was him. I sat there in the half-light, the computer screen fading to black. Legal office, I whispered. So this is how they do it. I did not confront them. Not yet, that would have given them power. Instead, I started writing things down. Dates, times, phrases. Little truths that might seem meaningless now but could matter later. On Tuesday, she removed my wife's old rocking chair from the porch, claiming it was too worn to keep. On Wednesday, I heard her on the phone saying, once the house is in our name, we can finally refinance. On Thursday, I found a second set of my house keys missing from the hook. Each note I wrote was a quiet rebellion. Every word, a small piece of control I refused to give up. That Friday, when they left for their appointment, I drove to the cemetery instead. I brought fresh carnations, was my wife's favorite, and placed them by her grave. The stone felt cold under my hand, smoother than I remembered. They are planning to take the house, I said softly, but they cannot take what it stands for. I stayed there until the sun dipped low. The wind brushed the grass, and for a moment it felt like her hand on my shoulder. When I finally stood, I felt something inside me settle. Not peace, not yet, but purpose. That night I came home to find her voice raised in the kitchen. He will not sign easily, she was saying. Then make him, my son replied, tired and irritated. I stood in the hallway listening. My heart did not race anymore, it just steadied. I turned and went to my study, opened the drawer and took out the house deed once more. This time I did not trace the ink. I read it with intent. Each line was a promise made, and I realized I still had the power to decide where that promise ended. I picked up the phone and called a number I had not dialed in years, my old lawyer, the same man who helped me and my wife when we bought this land. His voice was older, slower, but still kind. Mr. Graham, I said, it is me. I think it is time we updated some papers. He paused. Something wrong, sir? No, I said. Something right, finally. I hung up and looked around the quiet room. The house no longer felt empty. It felt watchful. I promised my late wife that this home would never be sold for greed, and I intended to keep that promise. That Monday morning, the fog hung low over the driveway like a warning. My son had already left for work. My daughter-in-law was in the kitchen, humming as she packed her gym bag. She did not even notice me slip out the front door with a briefcase in hand, the same one I carried to every bank meeting when I built this house from nothing. The law office was downtown, tucked between a florist and a bakery. The bell above the door chimed softly when I stepped in. Mr. Lang, my lawyer of 30 years, looked up from behind his glasses and froze for a moment before standing. Well, if it is not the man who swore he would never change his will again, he said with a smile. I nodded faintly. Times change, Richard. People change faster. He poured coffee and listened quietly as I explained everything, the insults, the renovations, the forged papers, the humiliation. His face never shifted from calm concern. When I finished, he leaned back. You still hold full ownership? He asked. Yes, my wife and I made sure of that. And you want to transfer it? To someone who deserves it, I said. Someone who will never use it for greed. He studied me for a long moment. Your son will not take this kindly. I'm counting on that, I replied. He nodded slowly and reached for a folder. There are options. You could sell. Or you could donate. Donate, I said without hesitation. A place that once sheltered love should keep sheltering it, even if it is not mine anymore. He smiled sadly. To whom? There is a local charity, I said, recalling a small brochure my wife once kept pinned on the fridge. Hope Haven Foundation, a shelter for families in need. She believed in them. I think she still would. We spent hours drafting the paperwork. Every clause was careful, precise, airtight. The house would be legally transferred to Hope Haven, upon signature irrevocable and protected. I read each line twice, my eyes catching on the phrase effective immediately. When I signed, I felt a strange calm. Not victory, not vengeance. Just relief. Mr. Lang closed the folder and placed his hand on it. You are certain? Yes, I said softly. I built this house for family, and they chose to stop being one. He nodded, sealing the envelope. Then it is done. Outside, the afternoon sun had burned away the fog. I stood there on the sidewalk, breathing in the warm air. A few teenagers laughed as they passed, and for the first time in months I smiled. It felt good to remember that the world was bigger than my pain. In my mind, I saw her again, my wife, on the day we first moved in. She had placed a small vase of wildflowers by the window and said, "One day, even when we are gone, someone else will sit here and feel at home." I never thought she meant it literally. When I came home that evening, the house looked ordinary again. Same walls, same smell, same people. But everything was different now. I had taken back something they did not even know I still possessed: power. At dinner, my daughter-in-law asked with forced politeness, "Where were you all day?" "Running errands," I said. She smirked. "Still keeping busy, huh? You should really take it easy." I smiled faintly. "Do not worry. Things are about to get much easier." My son looked up. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, folding my napkin, "you might want to keep an eye on your mail." That night I sat once more in the study. The house felt alive again, not with warmth but with quiet certainty. I opened the top drawer and took out my wife's photograph. "I did it," I whispered. "I made sure this place will keep helping people, not hurting them." For a moment I thought I could almost hear her voice, soft, approving. The kind of silence that holds peace rather than emptiness. I turned off the light and looked back one last time before leaving the room. The deed folder still rested on the desk, but the true ownership had already changed hands. By the time they realized what I had done, the ink would already be dry. 3 days later, a thin envelope arrived in the mail, white, crisp, and official. My daughter-in-law noticed it first, resting neatly on the kitchen counter beside her morning coffee. "From Lang & Associates," she said aloud, frowning at the return address. "Why would your father's lawyer be sending something now?" I was sitting at the table, spooning sugar into my tea, as if her question had drifted in from another room. My son entered, still half-dressed for work, adjusting his tie. He glanced at the envelope too, his brow furrowed. "Maybe it is about the insurance," he said. "Or the will," she muttered, eyes narrowing. She turned to me. "Should we open it for you?" I smiled faintly. "No need. It is meant for both of you." Her eyebrows lifted, but curiosity overrode her restraint. She tore the seal before I could stop her, though I had never planned to. Her eyes moved fast across the first page, confident at first, then slower. Her lips parted. By the time she reached the second paragraph, her color began to fade. My son stepped closer. "What is it?" She did not answer, so he took the paper from her trembling hands. His voice cracked as he read aloud. "As of October 3rd, full ownership of the property located at 41 Cedar Ridge has been transferred to Hope Haven Foundation." He stopped there, unable to finish. Silence filled the room. I stirred my tea, slow and calm. "Go on," I said. "You missed the best part." He read the next line under his breath. "With immediate effect and no remaining familial claim." She slammed the paper down. You gave it away?" I looked at her, steady. "No, I returned it." To purpose. My son's face went pale. "Dad, what have you done?" "What I should have done the moment you started treating it like a prize," I said. "This house was never meant to be currency." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. "You cannot just... This is everything we have." "No," I corrected softly. "It is everything I built. You only borrowed it." She glared at me. "You will regret this. Do you realize how insane this looks? You have made us look like fools." I leaned back, folding my hands. "You did that yourselves." Her voice rose. "Do you know how people will talk? How this will look when they find out you gave away your own home?" "People already know what it looks like," I said. "They saw it the night you called me too old for it." My son sank into a chair, staring at the table like it held all the answers he had lost. "Dad, please. You could have just talked to us." "I did," I said quietly. "You just stopped listening." She grabbed her phone, her tone sharp again. "We can contest this. You are not of sound mind. You have no idea what you signed." I smiled faintly. "Try it." My lawyer had the paperwork notarized in person. Full video proof, medical records attached, witnesses signed. "Every word you're about to say is already anticipated." Her voice cracked into disbelief. "You planned this?" I nodded. "While you were repainting the walls, I was repainting my future. My son looked up at me then, his voice small. Why, Dad? Why not give it to me? I am your son. Because you stopped acting like one, I said. The clock on the wall ticked, slow and merciless. She stood frozen, her mouth opening but no words coming out. I reached for the teacup, took a sip, and placed it back down. There will be people living here soon, I said calmly. Families who have never known safety. I think your renovations will finally serve a purpose. Her eyes widened. You cannot make us leave, I nodded once. The charity will handle that part. You will receive formal notice soon. My son rubbed his temples, whispering, This cannot be real. It is as real as the promises you broke, I said. I rose from my chair, took my cane and walked toward the doorway. The house was quiet again, except for her shallow breathing and his silence. At the door I paused and looked back one last time. You wanted a new beginning, I said. Consider this one. Then I stepped outside into the pale morning light. The sky felt wide again, like it used to. She turned pale as she read the words, The property now belongs to Hope Haven Foundation. By the next morning, word had spread faster than I expected. In small towns, news travels like smoke, invisible at first, but soon everyone smells the fire. Mrs. Langley, my neighbor, was the first to stop by. She stood on the porch, a kind of curious sorrow in her eyes. I heard, she said quietly. Is it true? You donated the house. I nodded. Yes, Hope Haven will turn it into transitional housing for single mothers. Her eyes softened. Your wife would be proud. I smiled faintly. I think so too. Behind me I could hear my daughter-in-law pacing in the living room, her voice raised but shaky. They cannot just move in here. This is private property! I did not answer her. The paper already said otherwise. By afternoon the neighborhood was alive with murmurs. Cars slowed as they passed. Curtains twitched. The story had turned into gossip. He gave away his home. His son lost everything. The daughter-in-law pushed too far. She went out anyway, chin high, pretending confidence. But when she returned, her face told the truth. They were whispering, she hissed, slamming her purse on the counter. Even the cashier at the store gave me that pity look. Maybe she was just being kind, I said quietly. Kind, she snapped. Do you have any idea what this looks like? You made us the laughingstock of this town. My son walked in then, his shoulders slumped, his voice weary. Stop, please, he said to her. You are not helping, she spun on him. You said he would not actually do it. He rubbed his forehead. I did not think he would. Their argument spilled into the kitchen. I sat in the corner with my coffee, silent, watching. It was strange, but for once I felt no anger. Only distance. Like I was watching a play I had already seen too many times. Finally I stood and said, You both wanted ownership. Now you have it, of your actions. She turned toward me, her eyes wet but furious. You ruined us. No, I said, I greed did. I just signed the paperwork. She stormed off, slamming the door so hard that a picture fell from the hallway wall. My son stayed behind, staring at the floor. Dad, he said softly, we have nowhere to go. I looked at him for a long time. You had a home, I said. You just forgot what it meant. That evening I took a slow walk around the block. The autumn air carried the scent of rain and burnt leaves. A few neighbors nodded politely, hesitant smiles that said more than words could. Mr. Wilson from across the street called out, Took courage to do what you did, Sam. Not many would. I raised a hand. It was not courage, Tom, just clarity. When I returned, my daughter-in-law was sitting on the porch steps, arms folded. Her mascara had streaked, but her voice was still sharp. So they will all talk about us, she said bitterly. Let them, I replied. The truth has a way of sounding louder when spoken quietly. She glared at me, but this time there was fear behind it, the kind that comes when pride begins to crack. Inside, the house already felt different, lighter somehow, as if it had exhaled after years of holding its breath. The phone rang that night, a reporter from the local paper. She wanted a comment about the generous donation. I said only this, it was never about generosity. It was about remembrance. Then I hung up. The next morning, a small article appeared with a photo of the house. Local retiree donates family home to charity. Cites love and legacy. Beneath it, my daughter-in-law's friends commented online. Karma always comes home. She saw it at breakfast and her face turned pale again. My son tried to take the phone from her, but she shoved it away. "This is your fault," she whispered. He did not argue. As they sat in silence, I poured my coffee and looked out the window. Across the yard, the first rays of morning light touched the mailbox, the same one my wife painted years ago. For the first time in months, it made me smile. I turned to them and said softly, "A home built on greed is already lost. If you have ever been betrayed by family and still found peace in truth, comment below." I read every story, but their humiliation was only beginning, because I had one more truth to reveal. 2 days later, the local newspaper ran a second piece, a front-page story this time. Local father donates family estate to charity after dispute, a lesson in legacy. There was a photo of me shaking hands with the director of Hope Haven. My name was printed in bold. Beneath it, a smaller line read, "Family declines to comment." When I walked into the diner that morning, every head turned just slightly. Some nodded respectfully, others simply watched in silence. The waitress, a kind woman named June, placed my usual black coffee on the counter without asking. "You did good, Mr. Graham," she said quietly. I smiled. Good is relative. June, but I did right. At the same time, across town, my son and daughter-in-law were learning just how small a community can feel when the truth escapes its walls. Her friends no longer answered her calls. The same women who had sipped wine in my kitchen now whispered behind grocery aisles. My son's workplace received the article in a group chat. One co-worker texted, "Your dad's story went viral. Tough break, man." He came home early that day, face drawn, voice hollow. "Dad, could you not have handled this quietly?" I looked up from my newspaper. Quietly is how I was humiliated. This is justice in daylight. My daughter-in-law came storming in from the porch, holding her phone. "They are calling me names online. Do you even care what this is doing to us?" I folded the paper neatly. "Did you care what it did to me when you called me too old for my own home?" Her lip trembled, but anger kept her steady. "You think you won, don't you? Everyone thinks you are some saint, but they don't know what kind of manipulative old man you really are." My voice was calm. "Then tell them." She stared, realizing she could not. There was no lie she could tell that would not expose her truth. That evening, the charity held a small event to publicly thank donors. I went, not for recognition, but to watch their faces as gratitude replaced greed. The hall was filled with people, volunteers, local officials, families who had once lived in shelters. When the director introduced me, the applause was gentle, not grand, and it felt pure. He said, "Mr. Graham's gift will help build something lasting, a place where dignity lives." I stepped forward to say a few words. "A home should protect, not divide," I said slowly. "Land legacy is not something you hand down in bricks or dollars. It lives in the kind of peace you leave behind." The crowd clapped again. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my son standing near the doorway. He looked smaller somehow, as if the light itself refused to rest on him. After the event, he followed me outside into the parking lot. "Dad," he said, his voice low, "you embarrassed us in front of everyone." "No," I said, turning to face him. "I taught you a lesson. Whether you learn it is up to you." He took a step closer. "You ruined my marriage." I met his eyes. "No, your wife's greed did that. I only removed its foundation." He said nothing for a long moment, then walked away. I watched him go. The same boy who once held my hand crossing streets now disappearing into darkness of his own making. I returned home alone, the house quiet again. The charity was scheduled to begin renovations within the week. I could almost hear children's laughter echoing faintly through empty rooms, a sound that did not yet exist, but soon would. The next morning, a neighbor dropped off a pie. "For you, Sam," she said softly, "not for sympathy, for respect." I thanked her, though the sweetness stung my throat more than it soothed. Through the window, I saw my daughter-in-law loading suitcases into her car. Her movements were sharp, bitter. My son stood on the steps, not helping, not stopping her. When she slammed the door and drove off, the gravel scattered like thrown words. He stayed there for a moment, staring at nothing. Then he turned and saw me watching. He did not wave. Just nodded once, of an acknowledgement maybe, or defeat. The air was still. The leaves rustled across the yard. I stood at the doorway, my hand resting on the frame, and thought, justice does not always shout. Sometimes it just leaves quietly, like she did, but she was not done fighting yet, and her next move would drag us both into court. The summons arrived on a Thursday morning, pale yellow paper, thick and deliberate. My daughter-in-law's name sat boldly at the top, next to the words "Petition to revoke property transfer." Her claim was clear, that I had not been of sound mind when I donated the house, that I had been manipulated, confused, emotionally unstable. I read it twice, calm as ever. I had expected this storm. You cannot shame the greedy without inviting their thunder. My son stood behind her when they arrived to talk it out, though his eyes would not meet mine. She spoke first. "We can still settle this privately before the hearing," she said. "Just reverse the transfer. We can all move on." I smiled faintly. "You have already moved on. You packed your suitcases." She crossed her arms. "I will not let you ruin our lives. You ruined your own when you tried to steal mine," I replied. That was the last conversation we had before the courtroom. The courthouse smelled faintly of polish and dust. The marble floor echoed under each hesitant step. I wore my best grey suit, the same one I wore to my wife's funeral. It fit a little looser now, but the dignity still held. Mr. Lang, my lawyer, met me at the entrance. "She's claiming diminished capacity," he murmured. I nodded. "I know. Let her try." Inside, the air was thick with whispers. Small-town cases rarely filled the gallery, but this one did. Reporters, neighbors. Even Mrs. Langley sat near the back, clutching her purse. When the judge entered, we all rose. My daughter-in-law sat rigid beside her attorney, chin high, eyes rehearsed. My son kept his head down, shame written across his silence. Her lawyer began the argument, his voice smooth but hollow. "Your Honor, my client only wishes to protect her father-in-law from himself. The donation was impulsive, made under emotional distress after family conflict." He glanced at me as if I were fragile glass ready to crack. Mr. Lang stood slowly. "Your Honor, my client was not impulsive. He was intentional. He had full medical clearance, notarized mental evaluation, and a video recording of the transaction, which we have submitted into evidence." The courtroom stirred. Her attorney blinked. "Video?" Mr. Lang pressed a button on his laptop. The screen at the front lit up with the footage, me sitting across from Mr. Lang at his office. My voice filled the room, steady and deliberate. "I am of sound mind, acting on free will, transferring my property to Hope Haven Foundation as a matter of moral principle." The silence that followed was surgical. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, studying my face on the screen. When the recording ended, Mr. Lang added softly, "You will also find a letter written by Mr. Graham's primary physician, confirming his cognitive health and emotional stability." The judge looked at me. "Mr. Graham, would you like to say anything?" I stood slowly. "Only this, Your Honor. A man is never more sane than when he refuses to let greed destroy what he built with love." For a moment, even the ceiling fan seemed to stop. The judge's eyes softened. "Thank you, Mr. Graham." Her lawyer shuffled papers, trying to recover. "Your Honor, if I may—" The judge raised a hand. "No, I have heard enough." He turned toward my daughter-in-law, whose face had gone white. "This court finds no evidence of incapacity. The transfer is valid and irrevocable. All legal fees are to be covered by the petitioner." The gavel struck once, clean, final, merciless. She gasped, half rising from her chair. "This is not fair!" The judge met her glare calmly. "Fairness was in the opportunity to act with decency. You missed it." My son buried his face in his hands. I turned to him, heart heavy but resolute. "I tried to teach you integrity," I said softly, "but you chose convenience instead." Outside, cameras clicked as I walked down the courthouse steps. Reporters called my name, asking how it felt to win. I paused for a moment and looked toward the sky, where sunlight was breaking through grey clouds. "I did not win," I said quietly. "I just stopped losing." Then I turned to see my son standing at the curb, his face pale, his voice trembling. "Dad," he said, "what happens now?" I met his eyes, gentle but firm. "Now? Now the truth lives where the lies used to." The judge leaned forward that day and said the one line that silenced everyone in the room. "Decency is the only inheritance worth protecting." The courthouse steps were steep that day, but I took them slowly, letting each one remind me that dignity walks at its own pace. My daughter-in-law's heels clattered behind me, her anger chasing my silence. My son trailed farther back, shoulders caved, his gaze fixed on the ground. The same ground he once promised to help me maintain. When we reached the parking lot, she exploded. "You humiliated us, in front of everyone." Her voice cracked, trembling between fury and fear. I turned, calm as still water. "You humiliated yourself the day you tried to own what was never yours." She stepped closer, shaking. "You ruined our future." I shook my head slowly. "No, child. You ruined your past. Your future just followed." My son finally looked up. His eyes were red, voice low. "Dad, please stop." I looked at him for a long moment, really seeing him, not as the man he pretended to be, but as the boy who once helped me hammer fence posts in the yard, who used to run barefoot through the grass his mother had planted. "Son," I said softly, "I stopped the moment you forgot where you came from." She turned to him, desperate now. "Say something. Do not just stand there." He didn't. His silence was her first betrayal of the day. When I walked away, I could still hear her sobbing behind me. But there was something hollow in that sound, like crying without belief. The kind that comes when you finally realize you've lost not just comfort, but control. That evening, the sky broke open with thunder. Rain pelted the windows as I sat in the study, the last time I would ever sit there as owner of that house. The transfer had gone through weeks earlier, but now it was truly finished, the papers stamped, filed, and witnessed. The lawyer's envelope still lay on the desk alongside my wife's old photograph. I could almost hear her voice in the storm. "You did right, Samuel. You protected the soul of this house." Then came the knock, soft, hesitant. My son stood at the door, soaked, eyes downcast. "She left," he said quietly. "Packed her things and left this afternoon." I nodded. "I figured. She said she could not stay in a house that was not hers." I smiled faintly. Then she finally told the truth. He came inside, dripping onto the rug his mother chose. "I do not know where to go." "There's a spare bed upstairs," I said. "You can stay until you figure it out." He hesitated. "After everything I've done?" I looked at him. "You are still my son. You just forgot how to act like one. Maybe this is your chance to remember." He sank into a chair, running his hands through his hair. "I thought I was doing the right thing, Dad. I thought modernizing, updating, making plans, I thought that was progress." "Progress," I said slowly, "is building something without breaking someone else to do it." He nodded, his voice small. "I see that now." The storm outside grew louder, lightning flashing across the window panes. I stared at the rain, remembering the nights my wife and I had sat in that same room, listening to thunder with warm mugs of tea between us. "Dad," he said suddenly, voice trembling, "what if I've lost everything?" I looked back at him. "You lost comfort," I said. "Not everything. Some things are heavier, but they are worth keeping." He frowned. "Like what?" "Like truth," I said. "Like conscience." He wiped his face, and for the first time in years, I saw something behind his eyes that I had missed, humility. And the hard kind that grows only when pride finally collapses. When he finally went to bed that night, I sat alone again, staring at the empty doorway where his wife had stood so many times, issuing orders and insults as if this house were her stage. Now the silence was pure. No bitterness, no sharp perfume, no cold laughter, just rain. The next morning I found her keys on the kitchen counter beside a note. "You will regret this. One day you'll be alone and that charity will not visit you when you are dying." I read it once, then folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer with the deed copy. "Maybe not," I said quietly to no one. "But at least I will die with peace, not poison." When I stepped outside, the storm had cleared. The air was crisp, washed clean. Across the yard, the first rays of sun touched the white fence my wife had painted by hand. For the first time in a long while, I smiled. For the first time, my son looked smaller than I remembered, and I realized his downfall was not mine to fix. The day the charity took possession of the house, the air felt different, lighter somehow. Like the walls themselves were relieved to finally exhale. I stood in the front yard as a small team from Hope Haven arrived, clipboards in hand, kindness in their faces. Their vans carried paint buckets, cleaning supplies, and the sound of new beginnings. The woman leading them, Mrs. Avery, shook my hand warmly. "Mr. Graham, we want to thank you again. This home will change lives." I nodded, glancing at the porch. "It already has," I said softly. Behind me, my son stood silent, watching the process. He had packed what little he owned into the back of his old sedan. The daughter-in-law hadn't returned since the stormy night she left. It was just the two of us now, standing where laughter used to live. Mrs. Avery's team began walking through the rooms, marking notes, measuring spaces, murmuring about repairs and possibilities. "We'll put a small library here," one of them said. "And maybe a nursery down the hall." A nursery! I felt something stir in my chest, an ache I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. I pictured the sound of a baby's laughter echoing through those halls, soft and real. My wife would have loved that. I followed them through the rooms, my steps slow. The walls had been stripped bare again, but not by force, by renewal. I ran my hand along the staircase rail, remembering the nights I'd waited up there for my son to come home safe, the nights my wife had fallen asleep on the couch waiting for him. Those moments were gone, but not wasted. When we reached the study, Mrs. Avery smiled. "We thought this room could be used for counseling sessions, a quiet place for reflection." I nodded. "It was always meant to be quiet," I said. She paused, glancing at the photo frame still resting on the desk. "Is that your wife?" "Yes," I replied. "She built this home more than I did," Mrs. Avery smiled. "Then her spirit will stay in these walls." As they continued their inspection, I stood in the doorway of that room, the same doorway where I'd once overheard betrayal, now filled with hope instead. When they left, the house was empty again. The sound of the charity's van faded down the street, leaving only the wind and the faint rustle of autumn leaves in the yard. My son lingered near the porch steps, his shoulders heavy. "Dad," he said quietly, "does it feel strange, seeing them take over?" I thought for a long moment. "It feels right," I answered. "Strange would have been letting greed keep breathing in those rooms." He nodded, staring at the ground. "I keep thinking about Mom, what she'd say." I smiled faintly. "She'd have told you to apologize sooner." He gave a short laugh, the kind that catches on regret. "Yeah, she would have." We stood there together for a while, just listening to the wind brush the trees. The air carried the scent of rain and fresh paint. Two things that always meant renewal to me. A few neighbors walked by, slower than usual, their glances warm this time. Mrs. Langley waved from across the street. "Proud of you, Sam," she called out. "Thank you," I replied. "But this isn't pride, it's peace." As the sun began to set, I took one last walk through the house. Each room held a story, a sound, a laugh, a whisper, a mistake. I paused in the hallway, looking up at the empty nail holes where family portraits used to hang. "You did your part," I whispered. "Now let it belong to someone who needs it." When I stepped outside for the last time, I locked the door gently. The click of the latch echoed like a full stop at the end of a long sentence. Mrs. Avery returned, handing me a small envelope. "Just a token of thanks, Mr. Graham. A photograph of the first family who'll move in next month." Inside was a picture of a young mother and her two children, smiling wide in front of the Hope Haven sign. My chest tightened, but this time from something good. A neighbor called from across the street. "You did the right thing." I nodded, holding the photo close. "I know," I said softly. "It finally feels like a home again." I turned toward my son. "Let's go." He hesitated. "Where?" "Forward," I said. As we walked away, I glanced back once, sunlight glinting off the windows, golden and warm. I picked up her photo from my coat pocket, and for a moment, it felt like she was there, approving my choice. The ceremony took place on a Sunday evening, the kind of late sunlight that feels like forgiveness, poured through the tall church windows of the community hall. Hope Haven had invited me as their guest of honor. I tried to refuse at first. I never cared for applause. But Mrs. Avery insisted. "Mr. Graham," she said, "this isn't about recognition. It's about legacy." So I went. The hall smelled faintly of old wood and coffee. Rows of folding chairs filled with townspeople, volunteers and a few families, who would soon call my old house their home. The sound of children laughing in the back was enough to make the air feel lighter. For the first time in years, the laughter in my life did not hurt. When Mrs. Avery took the podium, she spoke gently. "We often talk about generosity and numbers, donations, dollars, drives. But what Mr. Graham gave us cannot be counted. He gave us proof that dignity still exists in this world." The applause that followed was soft, respectful. I felt it more than heard it. She invited me to the stage. My cane clicked lightly against the wood floor as I walked up, each step measured. When I reached the microphone, I could see faces. Kind ones, curious ones, some I recognized from the diner or the church pews. And in the back, half hidden by the door, stood my son. His hands were folded, eyes fixed on me. I took a slow breath. "I am not good at speeches," I began. "I am better at keeping quiet, and sometimes too quiet. But silence, I learned, can be mistaken for weakness. And weakness, well, that's how good things get taken from you." A murmur moved through the room, agreement, empathy. "This house," I continued, "was not just wood and nails. It was built by two people who believed in work, in decency, and in keeping promises. My wife and I did not have much money, but we had time, and we spent it building something honest. When that honesty was threatened, I had two choices: fight with anger or answer with truth. I chose truth." I paused, the weight of memory pressing against my chest. A home is not a prize. It's a reflection of who you are. And when it stops reflecting love, it becomes just another roof. There was quiet, not the uncomfortable kind, but the kind that listens. Mrs. Avery stepped forward and handed me a framed copy of the new deed, the official document declaring the property as Hope Haven Family Residence No. 3. The ink was fresh, the seal golden in the light. "This," she said, "belongs in your hands, even if not in your name." I looked down at it, tracing the edges with my fingers. The frame gleamed under the warm lights, but what I saw wasn't paper. I saw my wife standing in the doorway, holding a paintbrush, laughing because I'd spilled primer on my boots. I saw the life we'd built, and how in a strange way it was still alive. When I looked up again, my voice was low, almost a whisper. "A house is not a gift if it costs you your self-respect." Applause rose again, louder this time, carrying warmth instead of pity. I nodded slightly, then stepped back, letting the moment belong to them, to the families who would soon walk through those doors. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. My son was making his way through the crowd, slow, hesitant. He stopped at the edge of the stage, his eyes wet. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "Dad," he said softly, "I didn't know you'd be honored tonight." "I didn't plan to be," I replied. He looked at the framed deed in my hands. "You really gave it all away, didn't you?" "Yes," I said, "and somehow I ended up richer for it." He swallowed hard. "I don't deserve to stand here." I met his eyes. "Maybe not. But you do deserve a chance to understand." The music began again, the gentle strum of a guitar filling the hall. The evening light stretched across the floor, and for a brief second it fell across both of us. Two men, standing on opposite sides of regret, finally meeting in the middle. When the applause ended, I saw my son's eyes, wet with something I had not seen in years, regret. It was late the next evening when I heard the knock. Soft, uncertain, like guilt trying to find the courage to speak. Rain tapped lightly against the window as I opened the door. My son stood there, drenched, the same suit from the ceremony still clinging to him. His eyes were red, his voice small. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. "You never needed to ask." He walked in slowly, looking around the small apartment I had moved into after the transfer. It was modest. One bedroom, one worn-out sofa, the faint scent of old wood and coffee. The opposite of what he'd grown used to. Still, his eyes lingered as though searching for something he'd lost long before the house. "It's quiet here," he said after a moment. "It's peaceful," I corrected. "There's a difference." He nodded faintly, wiping rain from his forehead. "She's gone," he said finally. "Took the car, took what little money we had left. Didn't even say goodbye," I didn't respond. "Some silences don't need filling." He sat down at the table, head in his hands. "I don't even know why I'm here," he said. "I just didn't know where else to go." I poured 2 cups of tea, setting one in front of him. "You came to the right place then." He looked up, eyes tired. "After everything I did." "Yes," I said. "Because what you did doesn't change who I raised you to be. It just means you forgot for a while." He tried to smile, but it fell apart before it reached his eyes. "You should hate me, Dad." I shook my head. "Hatred's heavy. I've carried enough weight in my life." For a while we just sat there, the clock ticking softly, the rain whispering against the glass. He looked around again, his gaze resting on the photograph of his mother on the wall. Her smile, gentle and forgiving as always, seemed to fill the silence for both of us. "I still hear her voice sometimes," he said quietly. "When I close my eyes." "I do too," I answered. Mostly when I forget how to forgive." He swallowed hard, eyes glistening. "I'm sorry, Dad, for everything. For her, for the house, for letting her talk me into it. I just thought—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "I thought I was being a man by providing. Turns out I was just taking." I leaned back in my chair, studying the boy I once knew behind the broken man in front of me. "Being a man isn't about what you own," I said. "It's about what you protect, even when it's just your own soul." He dropped his head, shoulders trembling. "I don't know how to fix it." "You start small," I said. "Fix your conscience first. The rest follows." He nodded, wiping his face with the back of his sleeve. "I want to make things right. Then stop trying to make them yours," I said. "Help someone else find what you lost." He looked confused for a moment, then thoughtful. "Hope Haven?" I nodded. "They're always looking for volunteers." For a long while he stared at the floor, lost in thought. When he finally spoke again, his voice cracked. "Do you think Mom would forgive me?" I glanced at her photograph. "She already has." He stood then, slowly, uncertainly. "And you?" I hesitated. "Forgiveness isn't a gift, son. It's a door. You walked back through it tonight." He took a deep breath, his eyes soft for the first time in years. "Thank you." I poured him another cup of tea. "Drink," I said quietly. "We'll talk more in the morning." He smiled weakly. "You still make it like Mom used to." Because I never stopped remembering how. We sat there until the rain faded into silence. No loud words, no dramatic apologies. Just two men drinking tea in the quiet. One unlearning pride, the other unlearning bitterness. As he prepared to leave for the night, he paused at the door. "Dad," he whispered, "I understand now." I nodded. "Good. But understandings like that come late. And they never come easy." When he stepped out into the night, the rain had stopped. The air smelled clean, like something ending and beginning all at once. He looked back once, eyes shining in the porch light. I nodded again, the kind of nod that says we're not done, but we're trying. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like a father again. It was spring when I saw the house again. The same street, the same white fence my wife had painted, only now the boards gleamed brighter. Newer hands had cared for them. The air smelled of lilacs and fresh-cut grass, and for the first time in years, the house didn't feel like it was holding its breath. I parked across the street and watched quietly as a group of children chased each other in the yard. Their laughter rolled through the open windows, a sound the walls had missed. A woman, maybe in her 30s, stepped onto the porch carrying a basket of folded laundry. Her face was soft, tired, but peaceful. She looked like someone who understood the weight of starting over. When she noticed me standing there, she smiled politely. "Can I help you, sir?" I smiled back. "No, ma'am. I was just passing by. I used to live here." Her eyes brightened. "Oh, you're Mr. Graham, aren't you? Mrs. Avery told us about you. She said this house was built on love." I nodded, my throat tightening. She wasn't wrong. She invited me inside, and for a moment I hesitated. But something, maybe my wife's memory, pushed me forward. The living room looked different yet familiar. The furniture was simple, the walls freshly painted a warm yellow. But there, above the mantel, hung something I hadn't expected. A framed photo of my wife, the one I'd left behind accidentally during the move. Mrs. Avery must have kept it. The woman noticed my gaze. "We decided to keep it up," she said gently. "It just belongs here." I stood there, unable to speak for a moment. My fingers trembled as I traced the edge of the frame. The glass was cool, the reflection soft in the afternoon light. "She'd be glad," I whispered. "This house was her heart," the woman smiled. "Then it's in good hands now." We talked for a while and about her 2 kids, how Hope Haven had helped her rebuild after losing everything. Her story was different from mine, yet somehow the same. Pain, betrayal, survival, but also the quiet power of starting again. Before I left, she handed me something small. "Mrs. Avery said this belonged to you." It was a brass key. The same key I'd once held the night I locked that door for the final time. Only now it had been polished, its edges gleaming like new. I turned it in my palm, the weight both familiar and strange. "That's just a token," she said. "You'll always be part of this house, Mr. Graham." I thanked her, my voice almost breaking. "No," I said softly. "This house doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to peace." As I stepped outside, the sunlight caught the porch rail, golden, forgiving. Children's laughter trailed behind me like a benediction. Across the street, I sat on the bench beneath the old maple tree, watching the house one last time. It wasn't the same structure I'd once fought to protect, but it was something purer, something my wife would have understood. The greed, the anger, the pain, all scrubbed away, replaced with life. My son visited every Sunday after that, not to talk about the past, but to help serve meals at the Hope Haven kitchen. The first time he told me he'd volunteered, he looked almost embarrassed. "She told me they're naming one of the rooms after Mom," he said. I smiled. Then maybe we finally did something right. We didn't talk about his wife. Some things are better left in silence. But his laughter had changed and softer now, more genuine. That was enough for me. On my dresser at home, beside the photo of my wife, I placed the brass key. It gleamed faintly under the morning sun that filtered through my window. Sometimes, when I wake early, I catch the light bouncing off it, and I swear I hear her whisper, "You did right. Sam, you brought the house home again." I close my eyes then, listening to the distant sounds of life coming from down the street, the laughter of children, the creak of a porch swing, the steady rhythm of time forgiving what pride once broke. The house no longer belongs to me, but the peace inside it always will, and as the sun slips through the curtains, I murmur the final truth I've earned. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you free others to begin. If this story touched you, share it with someone who still believes dignity outlasts wealth, because sometimes giving away everything is the only way to keep your soul.